last week of Jesus' life. He's been arrested, gone through the examination by the Jewish authorities. And this morning our focus is on Jesus' somewhat or so-called trial before the Roman authorities. And just before we get to reading all this, let's take a bigger view of what we're going to look at this morning. We're going to read a lot this morning, and I know a teacher's supposed to do more than just read at you. But our narrative, that is our story, is a news report of what went on. This is not great teachings of Jesus, it's just what happened. And so it's going to benefit us to see the view of Matthew and also Luke and also John as they tell the narrative of Jesus before these Roman authorities, Pilate and Herod. And in fact, our gospel writers have a lot of recording about these trials. They just had just a little bit about Jesus being brought before the Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin. And we wonder, what about that? You know, this is Jesus. He's a Jew, and he's in trouble with the Jews. Why didn't the gospel writers record more of that? And here are these pagan rulers, the Roman occupiers. Well, you see, Jesus had butted heads with the Jews now for several weeks. The last few days here in Jerusalem got really tense. They crossed wires very muchly. Jesus had these great woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. And so we've seen that side of Jesus' conflict with the Jewish side. So now what's left is the official civil trial from Rome. And I think that's why we have more writing about it now. All right, let's think about this. As we've said, Jesus has sort of two trials. One is religious by the Jews. And the biggest charge, of course, was that this guy, Jesus, thinks he's God. He claims to be God. He claims to be the Messiah. And we know he's not. So that's blasphemy. And so we can't have that. That's the issue with the Jews. Here's the Roman side. And they have occupied the country of Israel for some time. They're in charge, and they're concerned about two things: collecting taxes and not having any kind of revolt or insurrection. And the Jews hate the Romans hate the Jews. They have to get along to make the world work at this time and place, but they tolerate each other at best. And we'll see them come together this morning in this trial, and we see how the Jews manipulate the Roman authorities. All right, Rome had captured and conquered this part of the world. They were in charge. They ran things civilly, meaning the society of the regular government. And as you can remember from school days, whenever England first had the colonies over here in America, you know, their goal was to extract taxes from the colonies and also make sure that the colonies didn't revolt. Well, we know eventually that didn't happen. There was a revolt and all that, and we have our country today. But there's always this choice of who gets sent to these colonies or outposts to run things. Today, we call them ambassadors. We have official ambassadors from America over to all the other countries around the world. And the political families that are rich and famous and give a lot of money, then when that candidate wins the presidency, then they look for a payback, and a lot of times these ambassadors that go across the water to represent us as ambassadors are well-connected people that get payoffs from their previous work helping this guy get elected president. Okay, we know how that works. It's the way it worked back in Rome. These well-connected families, sometimes even paid the Roman emperor to put their people, their family members as ambassadors. And that's the way it works. Now, when these ambassadors went to Palestine, this area of Israel, as it's called today, the area of Palestine, this was not a plum job. This was not a cushy job. Just like for us today, if someone is appointed ambassador to England, that's a nice job. Ambassador to Sweden, that's a nice job. But to be appointed ambassador to the Congo or Uganda or wherever, that's not a real plum job. Well, here was Israel. It was a hot nation, dry nation, poor nation. If you think 2,000 years ago, they had to struggle to eat, struggle to have water, struggle to everything. And so this was not the first on your list if you wanted to be an ambassador or a governor from Rome out here. So they didn't get the best people to serve here in Israel as Roman governors. So that gives us an idea of who we're going to deal with Pilate, especially this morning, as Pilate examines Jesus. But another thing that comes into play is the Jewish religion. Now, if Rome had occupied other countries around there, they would have a populace to take care of and rule. But these people would just be normal pagans, meaning they would worship the sun god and the moon god and the rain god and the harvest god and all that. But here were the Jews. They were a cohesive people. They were descendants of Abraham. We have Abraham as our father. We're a clan. We're a group. We're a family. And so we're together. We're God's people. So when that mentality runs up against the Roman rule, you see the friction begins to come a little bit quicker and harder, so that the Roman dealings with these Jews is sometimes very volatile. So let's remember that as we go. So we have two governors that we're going to see today. One is Pilate, and he was the governor around Jerusalem, which is the southern part of Israel. And then another man named Herod was the governor for the northern part around Galilee, and that's where Jesus, grew up and did most of his ministry. There's a bunch of Herods in the Bible mentioned, so just don't worry about who this guy is, but his name was Herod. He was the governor for Galilee. Pilate was the one around Jerusalem here. And so that's where we'll begin. Now, any good administrator doesn't want problems from the people he or she's supposed to represent, right? And that's the way this governor would be viewed. I want to be a good governor. I just want peace. I want to get along with everybody, so my record's clean and I can move up in the system. The Caesars see me, they know me, and I did a good job in Israel, so maybe I can get a better job for the future. You want to keep the peace. You want to keep everything nice and smooth as an ambassador, as a governor here in this occupied country. And, the Roman governors didn't care for the Jews, but they tolerated them, had to get along with them so that he would not have a bad record, got a black mark on his record, so the rumors would get back to Caesar that this guy's not doing very well, so you get that. Now Pilate sort of egged the Jews on a little bit. He he was always taking a Roman flag. You know, the Roman flags, you know, represents the occupier. Well, he made a point of always having a Roman flag around here so they could always remember that they were an occupied country. And he also would have pictures of the Roman deities, the Roman gods that they worship. Sometimes he would put pictures of them around here and there. And they also got taxes. Remember, there was a temple tax that the Jews paid to take care of the temple. And he took some of that money and used it for his own purposes. So that's where we are with this setting now, as Jesus comes before Pilate to be examined. Now, I don't know how much we'll get done, but I'm going to, again, apologize for reading so much. Yes, sir, Dr. May.
One other thing before we start, to point out that God's always in control. God predicted his son to die how? In Isaiah, 700 years before, on a tree. The Sanhedrin's favorite way of killing somebody was stoning. The Romans had turned crucifixion into a science.
Yes. Yes. The Jews, if they had been allowed to kill Jesus, they would have stoned him. But the Romans had to do that, and they crucified him. That's right. As was predicted. Yes, sir. All right, anything else? All right, we'll begin in Matthew chapter 27, verse 11. Matthew 27, verse 11. And we're going to run into a name here in just a moment. This criminal was eventually released instead of Jesus was called Barabbas. And on about verse 16, some of your versions call him Jesus Barabbas. And so don't let that throw you. The name Jesus was common at that time. It was a form of their word Joshua. So anybody named Joshua would be called Jesus, so to speak. So don't let that throw you here as we read in just a few minutes. Okay, verse 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked him, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, that instead an uproar or riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. see this story and we see how it plays out, the first question that Jesus is asked, are you the king of the Jews? Now, if it's just the king of the Jews, that's one thing. But if there's any hint of any kind of revolting or insurrection against Rome, that's serious. So Pilate wants to know, are you really a king? Do you think you're a king? And Jesus just says, well, you've said so. The other questions Pilate asked him, Jesus refused to answer. He just didn't respond. He just sat there. And again, we say, why didn't Jesus defend himself? The answer is very clear. Jesus was on the way to the cross, and all that was happening now was incidental, unimportant. It was insignificant. The die was set for the steps to occur for him to be crucified. And there's no need for him to explain and do all that. He said, I could call down angels from heaven to fight for me, but my kingdom is not of this world. And that's why Jesus did not respond. That was, of course, the plan of God. Now, this man, Barabbas, was a known murderer. He was an insurrectionist, and he was a bad guy. And Pilate struggled with this. The festival of the Passover was here, and to sort of ingratiate himself to the Jews every year, he would throw them a little gift, we'll set free some prisoner that you guys choose. So it's our custom here at Passover to do that. So who do you want me to release for you? And he was thinking that maybe it would be Jesus the Messiah. They said, no, Barabbas, turn him loose. Well, what about Jesus? Oh, crucify him. And we know that. Now, Pilate's wife had a dream about Jesus, that he was an innocent man. He said a word to her husband, don't have anything to do with this man. And Pilate does this hand washing in front of everybody, a sort of a ceremonial way of stating, I'm washing my hands of this issue. We have that phrase even today. I'm washing my hands of this issue. I'm done with it. It's your problem. You take it. I'm through with it. And that's what Pilate did in front. And then he went on to ask the Jews, what do we do with Jesus? Crucify him. And again, Pilate continues to say, I don't see any crime he's committed. He said, that's okay. His blood be upon us, and we'll take care of that. So that's how the Gospel of Matthew shows the view of this trial, as we would call it, before Pilate. Let me pause there. Any comment or question on how this one played out? All right, let's turn over to Luke 23. And again, I'm going to read quite a bit. And we'll see just a little different angle here and there as we read. Luke 23, beginning with verse 1. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, we have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? You have said so, Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. But they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and he's coming all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, and Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressed him in an elegant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. And that day Herod and Pilate became friends, because before this they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us." And Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. All right. When we see Jesus before Pilate, the Jews manipulate Pilate again. They realize that, Pilate was not a Jew. He had no business deciding about religious things. He says that very clearly. I'm not a Jew, and you take care of your Jewish laws. But here, now the Jews said, "Yeah, but this guy, Jesus, he opposes things that Caesar wants," meaning, number one, he opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar, and he claims to be Messiah, a king. Well, did Jesus oppose paying taxes to Caesar? If you remember, he was asked that. Are we supposed to pay taxes to Caesar? Because, Caesar claimed deity, claimed to be, appointed by God and all that. So if we give taxes to Caesar, is that violating our conscience as Jews? This was the time now Jesus said, "I'll tell you what, go catch a fish, bring it to me," and inside the fish's mouth was this coin with Caesar's likeness on it, inscription. He says, "All right, then you pay to Caesar what is Caesar's, and you pay to God what's God's." Meaning, you be a good citizen in a secular way, civil way, do what you need to do, pay your taxes, whatever, and then you render to God what's God's. Fair enough. Okay. So this charge that this man is working against Caesar was false. Secondly, he also claims to be a king, which could be threatening to Caesar, because Caesar was the emperor. And this was, again, Pilate asked him, "Well, are you a king?" And Jesus just said, "Well, you say so." And things went on. Again, Jesus did not respond. So, learning that Jesus was from the region of Galilee, Pilate says, "I tell you what, the governor of Galilee, my cohort, is in town. So since you really came from there, why don't you go visit Herod and let him talk to you about this. All right, this man Herod was excited. Oh, I get to see Jesus. I've heard about this guy, and I've always wanted him to do a miracle for me. I want to see a magic trick. You know, I hear Jesus, fed 5,000. I hear he did this and that. So let me see if he'll do me a trick. Jesus was not about to stoop so low as to do a cheap trick for someone who was not going to believe anyway. So Herod didn't get his trick, and evidently it made him pretty mad. They dressed Jesus up and ridiculed him and all that, and sent him back to Pilate. And you see over and over, you see the crowd becoming in an uproar. You see the crowd yelling. It says their voices prevailed over and over. They kept crying, crucify him, crucify him. With loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. Pilate was a weak person. Pilate did not have a backbone as he should have had. Pilate was in a quandary. I know this Barabbas is a murderer. He's an insurrectionist. And by rights, I shouldn't release him. But I've got a crowd here that's causing a riot. And they're stirring up so much trouble that word's going to get back to Rome that I can't keep the peace here. So I got to decide what to do. And Pilate decides, reluctantly, even though I know Jesus is innocent, I'm going to kill him to keep the peace. The Jews manipulated and worked Pilate in this way to get Jesus killed. We see over and over, Pilate says, I just can't find anything that this man has committed that's worthy of death. And that was a correct statement. But he was a weak-willed person, and he succumbed to the pressures of the mob. And we see this there. All right, let me pause there from this view of Luke. Any comment or question here? All right, let's turn to John 18, and we'll see another view. A little bit different. John presents a few more little insights here. This is John 18, verse 28. John 18, verse 28. The Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. And by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Well then, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. And this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die, meaning crucifixion. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, No, not him. Give us Barabbas. And now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. All right, we'll pause there for a moment. The Jews didn't want to get defiled by a Roman court right before the next day's activities of Passover. So they sort of were on the outside of the palace here. They brought Jesus again to Pilate. Pilate says, well, what's the charge? Well, he violated our laws. Pilate says, well, I'm not a Jew. I don't know all this stuff. You take him and you deal with him as you need to do. And Jesus made it clear, though, that my kingdom, he says, is not of this world. That he had a view of kingship that Pilate could not understand. As a good Roman governor, his concept of kingdom was the rule of the king or the emperor over people. The rule over people. And of course, Jesus had a thought about the kingdom of God's rule over us, people, but in a spiritual way. And Pilate had no concept of that and no way to understand that. And it went right over his head. It's either you're a physical king or not. A or B. Can't be this other option of being a spiritual king. And so Pilate struggled with this. That was the only charge. The other charges were not developed there. And Jesus goes on to say, see, that's the reason I came to earth, was to testify to the truth. And everyone who is focused on truth, follows me or understands me. As if to say, I know, Pilate, that you can't understand me. Jesus is saying, every seeker that is seeking and searching to know God in some way, some form, connects with me as Messiah. And we saw that throughout Jesus' ministry, on the streets, on the fields, on the pathway. People who were seeking God, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, connected with Jesus. And that's what Jesus is trying to say here. Everyone who is on the side of truth connects with me, but you don't. And Pilate sort of waves them off and says, oh, what's truth? As if to sort of dismiss it. And it goes on and on, as we see. And when, Pilate says, oh, so you are a king. I'm sure he said that very sarcastically. And I'm sure he was very, very sarcastic in his words here. All right, let me pause here. Any thought or comment here? Yes, Dr. May.
I was born 6 weeks before World War II started and grew up in post-war America. It's amazing in the 50s how much Bible knowledge was influenced by Hollywood. And
Hollywood.
Ten Commandments.
Okay.
The Road, Ben-Hur.
Okay.
Demetrius and the Gladiators.
Okay.
There's even a movie about Barabbas. Victor Mature played Barabbas.
Okay, didn't know that.
How much of it came in that era of epic movies.
All right. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment.
Yeah,
But
no,
thank you.
That's
Thank you.
just requires no other.
Yes. Our time is about out, and I'd like to finish this up. Chapter 19 of John, we're not going to read. It's sort of the same thing again. They dressed Jesus up in purple robe, which means royalty, and that was their sarcastic way of mocking him as royalty. They, gave him a scepter, a rod. It's like a king has a scepter of authority. They have a rod, and that was making him some kind of a sham king. They bowed before him in fake obedience and honor and all that, and all such as that. We won't read all of this. Let's see. He was asked again in chapter 19, verse 9, where do you come from? And Jesus said in verse 11 to Pilate, you wouldn't have any authority over me at all if it wouldn't given you from above. And Pilate, of course, didn't understand that at all. See, in verse 12 it says, the Jews said, if you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. All right, these Jews were smart enough to say, look, you can't let Jesus go because he's no friend of Caesar's, and you're going to be charged with letting insurrection start in your backyard here. You can't let him go. And that sealed the deal. This weak-willed, mushy leader, governor of the area around Jerusalem, Judea, Pilate, gave in and said, okay, you take him. Now, he was scourged, he was flogged, and I think part of that was, maybe that's going to satisfy their need for blood. Maybe you could just flog him and make fun of him. It's enough punishment, but no. The Jews had crucified him. Now, they couldn't crucify him legally because the Romans would let them, so the Romans actually put Jesus on the cross, as we'll see next week. But there, the Jews sealed the deal to manipulate the Roman authorities, Pilate here, to get Jesus killed. Now, our time is up. Let me pause with one final thought here. One of the lessons that we need to realize is that we do not need civil government deciding religious issues, church issues, godly issues. When our forefathers that came from Europe came over here, they came from countries that had state churches, meaning that, like in Germany, the Lutheran Church was the state church, and the Lutheran government was run by the German government. The Lutheran Church collected taxes through the government, and on and on and on. You saw this in other countries around, and that was very unhealthy. And so when our forefathers came to America, they said we need to separate church and state, which is very wise. But let me be clear, they never said let's separate God and state. God can be part of our state activities, absolutely. Let's just keep the church separate from our civil authorities. And let's be careful as we look at life. We need to let Caesar be Caesar and let church be church. And I think we understand what we're saying there. But back to Dr. May's comment. We remember the movies, the Ten Commandments, the other ones you mentioned, yes, that helped us see a little bit about godly things. And would those movies be out today? Probably not in our culture. Anyway, time's up. Any comment as we close here?